Okay, we're going to do a short prophecy update today. I am very tired. I woke up at 1:30 this morning and got up at 2 in Minneapolis or Eden Prairie, Minnesota, and we went to the airport and flew back at 5:30 a.m. flight, which is I'm a morning person. 5:30 a.m. flights are a little bit on the iffy side. Pray for my wife. She's not a morning person. And, the joke in our marriage is we've been married 41 years. I'm a morning person. She's a night person. So we've really only been awake together for 5 years. And maybe that's why it's working, so I don't know. So we were in Eden Prairie, Minnesota for the Understanding the Times conference that Jan Markell has on, and had a great time. Got to see Bill and Claudia Koenig and have some meals with them, and Amir Sarfati. And then yesterday at lunch, I went back in the green room, and Michelle Bachman and Bill Koenig and Amir Sarfati and I sat there and talked for about an hour. It was very, very interesting. And we had a great time. It was a great conference. This year they only did a one-day conference. Usually they've done Friday night and all day Saturday in the past. This time Jan Markell decided to do just Saturday. And we talked a little bit last week, about a week ago, and she was like, yeah, I just don't know if anybody's going to show up, and because it's a one-day thing, and I'm not sure they'll travel for that. And so here's what happened. She's been doing this since 2002, and some years she's done 2 conferences. This was the highest one-day attendance she's ever had. It was the biggest attendance they've ever had in this church. And this church seats, the main auditorium seats, I don't know if it's like 3,999 or 4,999. And it was full when they started. And are we having issues, Brian? Okay. It was full. The parking lots were full at 10 after 9. And this is a big, big, big church. The chapel was full. All the overflow areas were full. There were people sitting in front of television screens in the hallways everywhere. So estimate is probably around 6,000, maybe a little bit more, attending the conference. So it was great to be there with fellowship of fellow believers and hear some great teaching by everybody, and it was great. So I know Jan will have those DVDs available in a few weeks, and so you can get those through her website at olivetreeviews.org. But it really was a sweet time of fellowship. Bill and Kristen Randalls sat with us. He's pastor of Believers in Grace in Marion, Iowa, just a phenomenal guy, and his wife, great people. So we'll talk a little bit about the convergence of the signs today. I'm going to apologize. I didn't pull any scripture out or anything like that. So the standard stuff about perilous times and wars and rumors of wars. So just insert those slides there mentally, and because I just didn't have time to get them done on the plane today. So we'll do a little bit of economics, and then we'll look at geopolitics, and I really don't think it'll be that long today. So this is an interesting story. Monumental deal struck by 150 nations to phase out powerful greenhouse gases. What does this mean? If you live in India and you wanted to get air conditioning, you're in trouble, because you won't be able to get air conditioning. And I've never been to India, but every time I see a picture, it looks like everybody is sweating. And this is what they're going to do. They're going to control the economy this way. Now, what's interesting about this climate change thing is, I don't know if you saw the news reports yesterday, that there was this massive storm heading for the Pacific Northwest. And weather.com and other reliable places were saying 150 mile per hour winds and 50-foot waves. Now, it was very windy, and they got a lot of rain, and they had some, big waves, but nothing like that. So here's the way I analyze the climate change thing. If they've got a storm right in front of them, and they can't do any better predicting it than that, and you know how it is. Every time it's Snowmageddon, we're going to have 85 inches of snow, and they cancel schools for a week, and what happens? We get rain. It rains sometimes. It doesn't even snow. Well, if they can't predict the weather than that, how are they predicting weather and climate 50 or 100 years in the future and basing all these crazy economic policies and environmental restrictions on that? That's just my take on it. This shipping thing continues to be, Hanjin is a large South Korean company that has gone into bankruptcy. There's billions of dollars of cargo and containers all over the world on ships that are sort of in a suspended animation. Nobody knows what to do with them. They're working it out. But this continues to be a problem because shipping worldwide is way down, which indicates that there's a recession coming. And that's what some of the economists have looked at, and they think that there will be a big recession. Now, the next few slides, I'm going to make a disclaimer, 2 disclaimers. One, I voted this week. So if there's anybody's listening that's running polling or fundraiser or anything, don't call my house anymore. Because you know, all you live here in Columbus, we're in kind of a swing state and a swing part of a swing state. And I'm sure your phone rings every night, all day. It starts at 8 o'clock in the morning and it never stops. It's torture. So I voted, so leave me alone. And then, I'll say the other thing, the other disclaimer in just a minute. So I'm going to talk just briefly about what I consider to be the most important issue in the election. And we have seen this week another massive, there's the allegations against Trump, there are the WikiLeaks disclosures of things about Hillary Clinton and what she believes, and so how they were trying to manipulate the Catholic vote. And this is the editorial from the Wall Street Journal the other day, Anti-Catholics for Christian, and they're going to try to change what the Vatican teaches about same-sex marriage and homosexuality and that sort of thing. And there's all this debate online. Should Christians vote for Trump? You can't vote for Trump and be a Christian. You can't do this. And I still say it's up to each individual's conscience. And people need to stop judging other people for how they decide what to do. So if you don't want to vote, I'm fine with that. I'm just going to tell you, though, that in terms of religious freedom and the Supreme Court, I do not understand how you could vote for Hillary Clinton. And to me, that's sort of the, so I'm not telling you who to vote for in opposition to that. I'm just telling you the effect that she will have on things will be absolutely stunning. And this is the clip. This is the standard clip that everybody should listen to until you have nightmares about it.
All the laws we've passed don't count for much if they're not enforced. Rights have to exist in practice, not just on paper. Laws have to be backed up with resources and political will. And deep-seated cultural codes, religious beliefs, and structural biases have to be changed. And
listen, when I have played that clip, and I go out, I read a lot of blogs from both sides of the political spectrum, and the people on the left, they always say, she didn't mean anything like that, you're taking it out of context. You know what? That's nonsense, because all the things that were,
recognize that the time has come.
All those things that we have expressed concerns about how she wants to change your mind, change your religion and everything, it's all in all those emails. Go read those emails that have been released, and those you want a context for what she said a year and a half ago? You now have the context. She meant exactly what our fear is as to what she wants to do. And she doesn't care. So there was also proof that the Justice Roberts kind of got rolled because this came out of the WikiLeaks disclosure. They were doing the Obamacare decision, and they wanted to influence Kennedy and Roberts to vote to uphold that law as constitutional. And so Roberts, as you know, he voted that it was, and his opinion on it is really it's pathetic. From a legal standpoint, it's just absolutely pathetic and weak. And he he capitulated, okay? He may be a great guy, but he capitulated on this. And what it shows is that when that decision was coming up, there was a concerted push by the Democratic Party in the White House to put the pressure on Roberts to roll over on that and vote that Obamacare was not unconstitutional. That is what will happen on many, many decisions. They will be manipulated if Hillary Clinton is elected. So decide what you want. Now, Michelle Bachmann, bless her heart, a great lady, become a good friend, I have a lot of respect for her. She told me, you need to play the clip of Hillary Clinton from the debate. I'm going to do an audible. I'm not going to play that clip. I'm going to give you a couple quotes. And the reason I'm not going to play the clip is I would have had to look at too much of the video and listen to too much of it a number of times to find the quotes. And I just don't want to beat myself up like that at 2 o'clock in the morning. So she said this during the debate last Sunday night. I think the current court has gone in the wrong direction. Because it's not liberal enough. Now, you tell me all the things. Anyway, I also want to see the Supreme Court reverse Citizens United, which has helped a lot of conservative groups pull their money together and do advertising and that type of thing, PACs, and get dark, unaccountable money out of our politics. Like she doesn't know anything about dark, unaccountable money in politics. I want a Supreme Court that will stick with Roe versus Wade and a woman's right to choose, and I want a Supreme Court that will stick with marriage equality. So listen, that won't change. So I have very clear views about what I want to see to kind of change the balance on the Supreme Court. And I'm just telling you, if she's elected, there are going to be a number of justices that are going to change. I hear Thomas is ready to resign almost probably before before the cases being heard this term are decided. They'll appoint new justices. They might have to have some arguments and rebriefings. And that court, if she appoints some people in their 40s and the Lord doesn't return, these people will be on the court for 40 years. It'll be changed. And it's not just that court, it's all the lower federal courts too. And it'll change. Everything will change. Voting rights things and people not having to show ID to vote, which seems to be one of the more insane things that I've seen. But that's the way it will be because they want to flip the elections. Okay, so let's look at some, let's see what I've got here. We'll go through this pretty quickly. Okay, geopolitics. It's a crazy world out there. As we talked, as Bill and Claudia and Pam and I talked at lunch the other day, it's like, what's going on? How is all this stuff happening all at once? And it's like, Bill's one of the pros, in Bible prophecy, and it's still, we're all having trouble, everybody's having trouble wrapping their head around it because of the speed at which things are developing. So this is, the hurricane down has caused tremendous problems down in Haiti. You need to pray for that nation, find some people to contribute to. Cholera is now rampant down there because of the lack of sanitation. The other thing that is coming, I think, and this is a little off the subject a little bit, the sort of economics. The situation in the Middle East is very volatile. There are many different threads that are operating all at the same time. One of this is what's going on with OPEC. And this is important because of the Saudi backing is sort of the lead dog on OPEC. The dollar is the reserve currency in the world. And because the dollar is the reserve currency in the world, that has economic benefits to us here in America. And you really don't want to lose the dollar as the reserve currency in America. I suppose that's a selfish way of thinking about it. But OPEC is in trouble because they all want to pump out a lot of oil because they need money. Price of oil is down. They have to pump more oil to keep the revenue going. There's a young king who's in charge now in Saudi Arabia and supposedly, or a deputy crown prince. He's about 31. So there's one more guy in between him, and he's like the new generation, the millennial generation of the Saudi royal family. Interesting story about him. He was in, I think he was around Monte Carlo or Nice or something recently, and he looked across, he was on his yacht, and he looked across the bay, and he saw a 440-foot yacht. That's a big yacht. So it was owned by a Russian oligarch, billionaire. So he called him up, and by the evening he had bought the yacht for $500 million. And they closed on it, and the Russian guy vacated the yacht the next day. Now, he's supposedly the new generation of the Saudis. I'm not sure how that's changed anything, but he's trying to get together a coalition, but there's a lot of articles in Foreign Policy, and then this in the can't remember if this is in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, the front page of the New York Times, where everything relies on oil, economic upheaval is coming. And they're having massive problems in Saudi Arabia. So does that play somehow into the prophecies of Ezekiel 38 and 39, which seems to indicate that the country of Saudi Arabia is kind of sitting on the sidelines? I don't know. I'm just saying that this is another thing that a lot of people overlooked, I think, is causing this convergence of events. Even Foreign Policy said that OPEC is in its death throes. Elsewhere in the Middle East, we continue with the terror attacks in Jerusalem. There were 2 killed in a shooting attack just last Sunday. The attacker was well known to the police. He had actually been released from jail, and there were people producing the copy of the court order that allowed him to be released, and people are pretty upset on it. Another hot spot is Afghanistan. We supposedly went in there, got everything cleaned up, but now they're overrunning cities. The Taliban is coming back, and I'm sure Al-Qaeda will rise again because of it. And so now Afghanistan is unstable. So everything in the Middle East is essentially, outside of Israel, is pretty much unstable. Jordan's having problems. The Muslim Brotherhood is rising there. They came out with some new textbooks. The conservative Muslims it's not conservative enough for them, so they're protesting. And the king there really, I think, in some respects, is hanging by a thread. And then there's this threat of a global thermonuclear war. Putin says things, Biden says things, Obama says things, Putin responds, and they've got everybody in a tizzy because there's this threat. Russia last week did a drill where they took 40 million people and put them into underground bunkers to simulate what they would do in response to a threat of a nuclear attack. Now, what's the takeaway from that? They got bunkers for 40 million people. We don't. When I was we all went, well, a lot of us lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis. I was about 8 years old, and I remember watching the black and white television at home, and I'm like, what's going on? Everybody seems nervous, and Mom says, this could be the end of the world because Russia and the United States are threatening nuclear war with each other. So here we are 54 years later, and what do we have? The same thing, nothing's changed. So I don't know exactly what's going to happen. I don't think anything will happen before the election, but I'm concerned about the period of time between the election and the next president being inaugurated on January 20th. And I'm concerned that during that period of time, there will be no restraint on Barack Obama. Congress isn't going to do anything to stop him. They haven't done anything much to stop him anyway. As I've said in the past, if I was in charge, I'd be sending something up to his desk and make him veto it every day. Just for the theater part of it, which Obama does much better than the Republicans. So is there going to be thermonuclear war? I think there will be at some time. Okay? Now, am I worried about it? We kind of live at that time where Christians really need to think about dying for our faith. And I think, as Mike Clapham has said a number of times, don't fear the devil. The worst thing he can do is kill you. So that even if you die, you win, and we need to kind of reorient ourselves to that. Stand faithful to the end, and what's the worst that's going to happen? you're with Jesus. You might die in the meantime, but the rapture might happen, or you might die. So, same result, ultimately, same result. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. Pay attention, and I just don't think anything's going to happen in the next few weeks until we get this election over with. But if Hillary gets elected, I'm afraid it's going to be chaos for a number of reasons. One of which I think she gets pardoned by Obama on the way out. So even if she gets indicted and all this other stuff, the only remedy then would be for Congress to impeach her. And do you think these guys we have will do that? I'm not confident. So there's this tension over Syria and Europe. There is tremendous amount of disinformation out there about this whole situation. And I've seen it all. I get dozens of emails every day from people, and it's all over the place. So here's my take on it. What I would encourage you to do is go look up Secure Freedom Radio, Frank Gaffney's thing from the Center for Security Policy, Secure Freedom Radio, to understand a little bit about Vladimir Putin. Because, and so on October 12th, he interviewed, I think his name is David Sater, and I think I actually have a slide of that in here someplace. Well, I'll get to it in a minute. It's about Putin and how he rose to power and how he really orchestrated things. And they were doing bombings and blaming it on Chechens, and they were just killing their people because they're thugs and they don't care about that. But one of the things that you need to understand, I can't remember where else I heard this on another radio broadcast, I think, Russia is the master of propaganda. And they just don't put out one false story, okay? They'll put out a false story that appeals to liberals and left-wing people. They'll put out a false story to appeal to middle-of-the-road things. They'll put out a false story to appeal to conservatives or conspiracy theorists. And it becomes very, very difficult to know what's going on. Now, there's pretty good evidence that the Obama administration was behind funding al-Qaeda rebels. And because they didn't go in and keep the peace in Iraq, that allowed Iraq to unwind, and those Sunni militias eventually became ISIS. Now, there's some people say they were funded directly. I'm not convinced of that. I haven't seen the proof of that. But certainly they created the vacuum in which ISIS rose to power. And that's a problem. And people say, well, why don't we just go in and bomb ISIS? We could get rid of them in a day. But what's the problem? We created a vacuum in Iraq, and ISIS filled it. So if we get rid of ISIS, what do we have? Another vacuum. And who will fill it? Shiite militias. And let me tell you, most experts say they will be far more brutal than ISIS has been. So it's a really damned if you do, damned if you don't situation as to what's going on over there because we need to go in and keep the peace. And we're still in Korea 70 years later, or 60 years later. We're still in Germany 70 years later, but we couldn't stay in Iraq for a couple of years. And so if we weren't going to stay there, we shouldn't have broke it, because now that we broke it, we own it. Russian warships standing for the English Channel in Germany, they're having major problems. And I still believe General Breedlove, who said that Russia, by bombing the cities to rubble, what they have done is in Syria, they have removed Shiite, or the Sunni people have left, and they've immigrated to Europe. That has two benefits. It's allowed the Shiites to come in, and I saw somewhere that Syria is essentially now a Shiite majority country of the people that are left. All the Sunnis have gone on to Europe. Germany has effectively been neutralized because of the influx of immigration. They've even gone so far as to try to cut migrant aid and some legislation because there's so many things going on. Now Egypt and Russia are sort of getting into an alliance. In the Sinai, we see this. I believe they killed about 100 ISIS terrorists who had killed 12 Egyptian troops the other day. And you don't hear much about any of this stuff unless you're digging around for it, because it was only 100 ISIS terrorists that were killed. I mean, so what's the deal? There was another bomb in Baghdad today, or yesterday, 35 people killed at a wedding. Did you hear about that? It's there, but it's hard to find. And here's Hezbollah. They're saying we're going to keep up the jihad in Syria. They've had 1,500 of their fighters die in Syria, and probably the total deaths in Syria now are over 500,000. ISIS is now using drones they've taken the technology, they're smart people, and they're putting explosives on it, and they're just suicide drones. They don't even have to get rid of any of their guys to do that. You still have the situation with the Kurds expanding their territory. So this situation in Syria continues to be very fluid, especially down in the areas along the Golan Heights. The black plains there, those are where the U.S. coalition-led Air Force strikes are taking place. The red ones are where Russia and Syria are bombing. Now, I know there's a lot of people say it's all our problem, we're the only ones who are doing things bad. But Putin stayed out of this for a long time. And he came into it, it was just about 6 months ago that he came into it. And what did he say when he came into it? You have to remember what he said. We're going to come in here to what? Defeat ISIS. And you can go and look at the Institute for Study of War, understandingwar.org, and their charts that they've put out every week or every 2 weeks, the situation reports, and you will find that with very few exceptions, all of the Russian bombing has been in the pink area, the pink and yellow areas. Why? Because they want to help Assad keep that part of the country. They get their seaport, they get some airfields, they have a presence in the Middle East now, they have a warm water port, which they've always wanted. And they're bombing these cities to rubble. Those are not being done by rebels with hand grenades and shoulder-launched grenades. Those are being done by barrel bombs. And you can watch, there's tons of videos you can watch on the internet of Syrians photographing, taking pictures of the Syrian Air Force bombing them. We also have this coming battle for Mosul, and that's something that's very fluid. They've been talking about this for a year. But they're concerned that even if they go in, ISIS will have, this is a city of over like 1.2 million people. There will be 1 million people's lives at risk if they go in on an invasion. It'll be a humanitarian disaster matching some of the worst days of the Syrian civil war. They will have to go house to house to house. If U.S. troops are involved, they will have to go to house, and the homes are booby-trapped. And the United States Army, I'm told, and I have a friend in the Army, I'm sure he'll correct me if I'm wrong, at least one report I read this week said that they've never taken over a city like that in close quarter, a city that large. And so it's sort of, in some respects, it's an unprecedented thing. And because you can't go in and you can't carpet bomb the city before you go in, because you'll kill all the people who are there that want to be freed. So it's really a tough situation. So I made up a little chart of our Eastern Hemisphere here thing of some of the hot spots that really are sufficiently strong enough, hot enough that they could cause a third world war. You have over here, you have North Korea. I understand Kim Jong, whatever that little guy is called, hasn't been seen for a month because he's afraid he's going to be assassinated. You have the Spratly Islands there in the South China Sea, where China is building islands and acting like they interfere with the shipping lanes. You have Pakistan, Kashmir. You have Afghanistan that I talked about. You have the Persian Gulf, which is a choke point for a lot of the world's oil. You have Sinai, you have Egypt, you have, of course, Syria, you have the Crimea Peninsula, and then up here in the upper corner, you still have Ukraine and the Baltic states, because Russia put in some special missiles in the Baltic states. And so it's a huge problem. So any one of these could explode. I'll talk about this one down here about the, let's see here. Well, Russia, okay, so here's the European guys are going to blame Russia for everything in Syria. So there's a war of words, and there's some things going on the ground, and how this, It's just very tense, and it's one of these things that could flash off into a major. Some people say it's already a world war. Who knows? This is an article in the New York Times yesterday. Berlin, 1945, Grozny, 2000, Aleppo, 2016. I mean, this is a city of millions of people, and it's over half of it's completely reduced to rubble. This is a flashpoint, though, that's just kind of hot. We have some Navy ships there in the Gulf of Aden. They're at the south end of the Saudi Arabian Peninsula near Yemen. And the Houthi rebels have been shooting at one of our ships, the USS Mason. They fired at it 3 times this week, and just another one this morning. And this is important. Why? Because the Houthi rebels are backed by Iran. They have Iranian missiles. And people will say, well, Iran's not controlling. Listen, they're not going to be using Iranian missiles shooting at U.S. ships unless the Iranian mullahs say that it's okay for them to do so. So this is causing a lot of trouble in Saudi Arabia from an economic standpoint, how they handle the war, because they don't back the Iranian people. So if you want to know what the early stages of a war between Saudi Arabia and Iran looks like, go look around Yemen and see what's going on there. But this is another major shipping choke point because of all that traffic that comes up from the Indian Ocean, up through the Red Sea, up through the Suez Canal, through the Mediterranean to Europe. And if they don't have that, they got to go all the way around Africa, which adds weeks to any shipping and a lot of cost. So this is a flashpoint that you need to keep up. That's how the ships go through that choke point. And we know that now what Iran is doing is they're sending ships down there to look at it. Iran has said it has dispatched 2 warships to the Gulf of Aden to ply the same waters as several U.S. Navy vessels are already operating there, one of which launched several Tomahawk missiles at Tehran-backed Houthi radar installations early Thursday morning. They destroyed them. Iran said, well, they're sending their ships there to protect Iran's trade vessels against piracy. I think that one's probably propaganda. I'm just taking a wild guess. So it's a threat to Red Sea shipping. Yemen's Saba news agency, which acts as a mouthpiece for the Houthi government, charged Thursday that U.S. allegations of its ships being targeted were made to create false justifications to pave the way for Saudi-led coalition to escalate their aggression against Yemen and to cover for crimes continually committed by the coalition. So here's the situation, and I'll be really quick in wrapping this up. Israel's really concerned about what Obama is going to do. They're afraid that if Clinton is elected, Obama's going to head directly to the UN with a resolution or support a resolution that supports a Palestinian state. The United States Senate sent a letter, 88 of the senators sent a letter to the Obama administration saying, don't do this. Kerry was confronted. The New York Post article says this: Israel faces a unique window of danger from November 9 to January 20. What might President Obama do in his final days to slam the Jewish state? Start with Secretary of State John Kerry's recent flat refusal to promise a U.S. veto on any upcoming anti-Israel resolution in the UN Security Council. On Saturday, Haaretz reports Prime Minister Netanyahu told Kerry he's counting on Washington to stick to its policy of nixing anti-Israel resolutions. Kerry's reply: the administration has yet to make a decision on the matter. What's that mean? Watch out. Because if Hillary gets through the election, then there's no brakes on Obama. He's there for another 2.5 months. And Caroline Glick has a great article. I'll just cover a little bit of this about talking about the situation in the Middle East there at Yemen. And she's just talking about what does all of this mean? And she wants to know why is this happening? Why are Iranian-backed rebels shooting at U.S. warships in the Red Sea? The simple answer is that Iran has challenged U.S. power at the mouth of the Red Sea because it believes that doing so advances its strategic aims in the region. Iran's game is clear enough. It wishes to replace the U.S. as the regional hegemon at the U.S. expense. Since Obama entered office nearly 8 years ago, Iran's record in advancing its aims has been one of uninterrupted success. And Caroline goes on and makes a very good analysis of what's going on. And she says, if you really want to understand what happened, look at what happened in recent history. Because who is the president's foreign policy guy? It's a guy named Ben Rhodes. Remember they had the New York Times article where he was very arrogant. Now you haven't heard anything from him. Why? Because the media is in the pocket of everybody, and so they're protecting him. They're not forcing him to answer questions. So she says, well, look what's going back. And let's see here. She says, go back and look at the Iraq Study Group report in 2006. And that was done by Lee Hamilton, which you can't see because I covered up his picture. I didn't animate the slide correctly. The Iraq Study Group report. You can download the PDF if you care to read it. And on Lee Hamilton and James Baker. James Baker, no friend of Israel. So they came out with this joint report, and they essentially said that, well, Iran opposes Al-Qaeda, so we should help Iran. That was 10 years ago, that's what they said. And you see here, Ben Rhodes, special assistant to Mr. Lee Hamilton, in writing that report. So, what happened to that report? Well, here's one of its conclusions. The United States must build a new international consensus for stability in Iraq and the region. In order to foster such a consensus, the United States should embark on a robust diplomatic effort to establish an international support structure intended to stabilize Iraq and ease tensions in other countries in the region. This support structure should include every country that has an interest in averting a chaotic Iraq, including all of Iraq's neighbors, Iran and Syria among them. And so the thinking was, well, if we just are nice to Iran, everything will go along quite well. That was 10 years ago. Bush rejected that. Bush 43 rejected that report. He did not act on it. He didn't think it was right. But now what's the problem? Obama's in office, and the guy who helped write that report, the architect of that report, is his foreign policy guy. So you want to know where his foreign policy is going? Read that report and its recommendations. Caroline makes this point. Despite all the stuff that's going on, Obama has also said nothing about the atrocities that Iranian-controlled militia have carried out against Sunnis in Iraq and has stopped operations against Hezbollah. What distinguishes Obama from his predecessors is that he has based U.S. policy on a deliberate denial of the basic reality of Iranian hostility. Not surprisingly, the Iranians have returned his favor by escalating their aggression against America. Israel is justifiably worried about the implication of Obama's intention to harm it at the UN. And she's right. You can read that article on Friday's Jerusalem Post. One more thing, and we're done. UNESCO came out against this week. Headlines everywhere. No Jewish link to the Temple Mount. Here's a copy of their report, which they talk about, this is what's going on, and what's the term they use? Occupied Palestine. And they also say this, and it's just paragraph after paragraph of this, deeply deplores the failure of Israel, the occupying power, to cease the persistent excavations and works in East Jerusalem, particularly in and around the Old City, and reiterates its request to Israel, the occupying power, to prohibit all such works in conformity with its obligations under the provisions of relevant UNESCO conventions, resolutions, and decisions. But I thought UNESCO was about preserving heritage and finding and sponsoring archaeological digs to find out what the heritage of a particular site was. And it is everywhere else in the world except in Israel when the Jews are involved. And this thing goes on for paragraph after paragraph, firmly deplores this, deeply decries. I mean, it's just awful. They're actually, Jews want to go up on the Temple Mount. The other thing that you might not have noticed is that the Metropolitan Museum of Art right now, there's a special exhibit in New York City on Jerusalem. And what they do is, it's very clever the way they do this, that they have all these exhibits, but the exhibits that sort of would support the Jewish aspect of Jerusalem are couched in terms of, for example, there's a lady that is praising the beauty of the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So it's sort of like, yeah, Jews, we love this that they're here, but it's never talking about their heritage. And so it's a very subtle attack on everything. People in Israel were outraged. The Palestinian foreign minister, one person on UNESCO came out and said, we're really getting a little bit extreme in how we're dinging Israel all the time. And so what happened? The Palestinian foreign minister came out and said, she needs to shut up or resign. Netanyahu came out with some things. There were articles in the Jerusalem Post and everywhere about this is embarrassing to UNESCO. Why do they keep doing this? And Benjamin Netanyahu tweeted this: "What's next? A UNESCO decision denying the connection between peanut butter and jelly, Batman and Robin, rock and roll?" And he has this thing out. He says it's like saying China has no connection to the Great Wall and Egypt has no connection to the pyramids. But it's okay. Now, he's correct. It's moral bankruptcy on the part of the UN and the UNESCO that they allow this. And he says, listen, you don't trust Jewish history in Jerusalem or Israel? Go to Rome. Go to the Arch of Titus. There you see the symbol of the Jewish nation, the menorah, the seven-pronged menorah, engraved in stone on the Arch of Titus in Rome for almost 2,000 years. You don't need all this stuff. Somebody suggested that Matthew 21:12 should read, and Jesus went into Al-Aqsa Mosque, Al-Haram al-Sharif, and cast them all out and sold and bought in the Al-Aqsa Mosque and Al-Haram al-Sharif, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of those that sold doves. Caroline has another editorial somewhere else, and she just says, look, this needs to stop. We need to go in the aggressive. And there's an article in Commentary Magazine by Jonathan Tobin who suggests that in some respects, some people are waking up to this. But I think this is temporary. I hope that it changes. But we know that the scripture tells us many places that all nations will gather together against Jerusalem in the end times. And they'll do it because of the Jewish character of the city. They'll drive the Jews out. We know the Antichrist will do that. And so we know there's a time of trouble coming. But in the meantime, people need to fight this. And what's going on is just absolutely pathetic. But it's the state of the world. So I apologize I went a few minutes over as I promised. And so now I get to buy my own lunch. And but anyway, look, it was a great weekend. There's a lot of things going on. Pay attention. Keep in prayer. Stay in the Word. Because there's a lot of information out there that will mislead you. Let's pray and let's go. Father, thank you for everybody being patient today and staying over. And thanks so much for the crew here that helps set up and tear down each week, and how vital they are to everything that we do here. We so appreciate that. And Lord, we just pray that you'll steal our minds and hearts. Bless us as we go this week. In Jesus' name, amen.